everybody. First of all, I want to thank SWAP members for inviting me to be part of this excellent colloquium. I learned a lot yesterday, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to keep learning a lot today about this country that's going to be my home for the next 2 years. So for me, it's really exciting to be here. It's amazing, actually. It is a pleasure to talk about the political situation in Spain, the anti-austerity and pro-democracy struggles that have been going on for the last 4 years in a context of a multidimensional crisis. The crisis in Spain is simultaneously economic, political, social and institutional. My presentation is not going to be a theoretical analysis. What I'm going to do, connecting with some of the discussions we had yesterday, is I'm going to tell you a story of, actually an optimistic story of collective creativity and a struggle against neoliberalism. That's what's going on at the moment in my country. It could be said actually that everything started tomorrow, 4 years ago, in 15th of May 2011, and it's still going on. I mean, the way it's going on has changed. There has been a strong displacement from grassroots politics, that was how everything started in 2011, to institutional politics at the moment. I'll explain this later. This year we have elections in Spain at the local, regional and national level, and as a result of the cycle of protests that I'm going to be presenting here today, we don't really know what is going to happen. I mean, there is an unprecedented opening of politics in Spain, and that's what makes the situation so interesting. For the first time in decades, we are facing a real possibility for changing not just the content of economic and social policies, but actually the ways of doing politics. You know, that's our struggle there. And well, that's an exceptional choice to do. There has been a lot of social conflict and a lot of political passion and innovation and collective intelligence in the last 4 years in Spain, and that's what I would like to share with you today, trying to explore the connections but also the frictions between these two political moments, the grassroots moment and the institutional moment. Connecting with the idea of the making and unmaking of social orders, it could be said that 2011 was the beginning of the end of what we call the regime of 78. 78 was the year that the Spanish Constitution was approved after almost 40 years of military dictatorship in the country. Right, so the regime of the 78 was the political system established during the transition. The transition, you know, with capital T, because that's like the founding myth of Spanish democracy. It was the outcome of a series of negotiated settlements between the Franco regime, the dictatorship, and the opposition parties, and it set a set of institutional arrangements and the emergence of the political elites that have dominated the country for the last decades. Such elites privilege political stability at a moment of intense unrest in the country. We always say that the dictator died in bed, and he actually did, but that dictatorship died in the streets, through the struggle of people, the workers' movement, the students' movement, women's movement, community struggles. Well, the thing is that in order to achieve such stability, those settlements transition granted political parties the monopoly over politics in Spain. You know, politics is just what politicians do, and all you have to do is vote every 4 years and trust them. Okay, and so from its very inception in Spain, democracy was a very low profile, low intensity democracy. But the regime of 78 is not just an institutional order, it's also a symbolic order. You know, it was the symbolic order that defined what was possible and what was impossible to do in political terms in the country. And that symbolic order is exactly what for the first time in decades is being questioned, problematized and debated at a large scale. And to some extent, we can say that the destabilization of that symbolic order is what has provoked the political opening that I mentioned before. The crisis in Spain erupted in 2008, but since from 2008 until 2011, responses were very, very weak. I mean, social movements were completely unable to organize and sustain struggles. We kept asking ourselves, how is this possible? I mean, how is this possible that taking the situation we're going through, nothing is happening? I mean, we kept asking this each other every single day. It was a very frustrating feeling inside the social movement networks. And then you had a complete different setting in social networks. You had all these conversations going on about the crisis. I mean, by people, led by people that were not activists at all. They keep talking and talking about their daily lives, how the crisis were impacting their lives and the families' lives and the friends' lives. And what happened is that at a certain time, in early 2011, some of these people that were having these conversations decided to take the conversation one step further and call for a demonstration on May 15, 2011 in every single city in Spain. They created a Facebook group, they were on Twitter all the time. People started to create pro-mobilization groups in every single city to organize the demonstration, and they just launched a very simple poster and a manifesto. This was the poster, this is it, no signs, no nothing. It says, we are not merchandise in the hands of bankers and politicians. Take the street, real democracy now. That was it. And then the manifesto. And the manifesto started something like, we are ordinary people. We are like you. People who get up every morning to study, work or look for a job. People who have family and friends. People who work hard every day to live and to provide a better future to those around us. Some of us consider ourselves progressive, others conservative. Some of us are believers, some not. Some of us have clearly defined ideologies, others are apolitical. But we're all concerned and angry about the political, economic and social situation we see around us. Corruption among politicians, businessmen, bankers, living as helpers and without a voice. This situation has become a daily suffering, but if we join forces, we can change it. It's time to change things, time to build a better society together. As you can tell, I don't know here, but at least in Spain, this is not the language of social movements. Not at all. I mean, they don't talk about anti-capitalism, they don't talk about the revolution, they don't even say we are the left. That wasn't it. It's a completely different group of people. It was something different, and because it was different, it worked. You know, so it wasn't just a critique of the old ways of doing politics, it was also a critique of social movement themselves. So that was a big lesson for us to learn. Well, anyway, okay, the demonstration was a big success. It was a huge success all over the country. But the most extraordinary thing happened afterwards, the demonstration. In Madrid, after the demonstrations, there were some riots. It was almost the only city where the demonstration ended up with riots. And then people got scattered all over the city center. And after a while, some small groups went back to the main square in the city, just looking for the friends or trying to decide what to do next. And there, what we found was just other groups of people doing the same things, you know, like just wandering around. And they started to talk each other. And when they talked to each other, spontaneously, we still don't understand why or how that happened, they decided to camp there, to stay there overnight. That's not common in the Spanish repertoire of action for social movements. They decided, we are going to stay here tonight, no one's going to move us from here. Okay, they started tweeting this thing and calling other friends, and they stayed there overnight, and the following day, on Monday 16, more people kept arriving to the square, and that evening there was the first huge assembly in the square, and more people decided to stay overnight again. And then in that night, between the 16th and the 17th, police violently dismantled the camp. and the images started circulating really fast all over the country. And what happened is really hard to explain. What happened is was that the following, I mean, on the night of the 17th, people took over every single main square in the country. This is in Madrid. You might have seen this picture, you might be familiar with this picture. This is another perspective. I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, who are these people? I mean, where do they come from? No one knows. But you just stop asking yourself. You just enjoy it because it's just unbelievable. And this is Madrid, but at that point, I mean, this was like the beginning, what we call the beginning of the 15M, 15 May, 15M movement. At that moment, I was living in Granada, a small town in the south of Spain, and it was the same thing. It was a small town. Every single evening, we had these huge assemblies for hours and hours. The people just crowded the square. It was simply unforgettable. It was wonderful. In the squares, you could see the intersection of 4 different elements. There you had the encounter of the bodies. I mean, like the getting together. People just looking for each other in a society where you are an atom. You know, you're by yourself. And then here we were looking for each other. The second element was the shared word, you know, an endless political conversation. Just people eager to listen and to speak to each other. You had the passion, the emotions. I mean, emotions were a key element of this whole process. And then you had the collective intelligence, you know, the knowledge and the skills of everyone just put there to work for the common good. I mean, and then the intersection of these 4 elements, the bodies, the word, the emotions, and the collective intelligence, is what shattered this 78 regime consensus, that symbolic order. And that redefined the idea of what was possible and what was impossible in political terms in Spain. And that translated into an extraordinary period of political mobilization and experimentation. During 2011, 2012, we kept having massive demonstrations all over the country, and we had a multiplicity of grassroots initiatives, networks and projects that blossomed in every possible field of politics. I mean, it was a huge process of repoliticization of the country. Some of these initiatives were bigger, like the Green Tide. We call it the Green Tide against the cuts in public education, or the White Tide against the cuts in the public health system, or the mobilization of the platform of people affected by mortgages. You can read there, Stop Desahucios, Stop Evictions. You know, there have been over 500,000 evictions during the last 5 years, so there's big problems and there's a big social movements built around these situations, and some other movements and initiatives were much smaller. But what is important here is that these new solidarities were being built all around the country, and these horizontal solidarities, you know, against the crisis, this taking care of each other, that's what it was, somehow explain the singularity of Spain in the European context. I mean, in Spain, the rage provoked by the crisis is oriented upwards, you know, against the economic and political elites that have been plundering the country for the last 3-4 decades, whereas in the rest of Europe, the same rage is directed toward migrants. You know, and I think that this movement, what happened in the squares, was the vaccination in Spain against this terrible xenophobic wave that affects most European countries at the moment. Well, nevertheless, in 2013, mobilization seemed to reach an anticlimactic point, whereas the crisis was hitting really hard. I mean, the window of political opportunity remained open, but we couldn't translate all that energy into real changes. So that was an impasse moment for the year. But some of the numbers I mean, the employment rate raised from 9.63 to 26% in 5 years, and for the age 20 to 24 it reached 53%. I mean, that's amazing numbers. And then you have thousands and thousands and thousands of young people just having to leave the country because they have no possible future in Spain anymore. So, well, it's not a nice situation, and that was exactly the context where this new movement, party movement, Podemos, emerged in January 2014, with a discourse that resembled all the discussions in the squares, with radical emancipatory proposals, and presenting themselves not as a political party, but as, and I quote, a participatory method open to all citizens, that was open to provoke new hegemony. Well, the thing is that 4 months later, in the election for the European Parliament, they achieved 8% of the votes. You know, over 1 million votes for a party that there was 3-4 years months off. I mean, that's really astonishing. And then everybody got kind of shocked and started talking about them. I mean, they gained more and more popularity, more and more support, and at a certain point, polls started to say that they could even win the general elections. So there was kind of, whoa, what's going on here? And then this provoked a huge, widespread sense of euphoria. I mean, we were euphoric, and huge hopes and huge expectations. There was the feeling that the elites could actually be fought and defeated in their own terms. And we had never ever before had such feelings. It's something to discuss anyway. And subsequently there was this strong displacement from grassroots politics to institutional politics and elections, and that's where we are now, in a whole new scenario. I'm going to talk first about the general elections and then about the local elections. Both are going to be held this year. Okay, about the general elections. The people that created Podemos they were extremely clever in reading, in understanding the situation, the political situation in Spain, and their importance in terms of imagining and creating a political alternative is absolutely out of discussion. I mean, their eruption has changed the political landscape altogether. During the last year, they have set the agenda. I mean, they have imposed political debates, and they have forced the other parties to adjust to this new situation. It's funny to see now how the traditional parties changing their leaderships, changing their language, changing even some of their proposals. They even dare to talk about a second transition. You know, well, nevertheless, Podemos is in a very complicated situation right now. This is the last poll. It came out last week. Podemos is the purple one, and you can see as it is going down as fast as it went up. Why? Well, they have had to forge a political party in a very short time. They had no organization. They are building it month by month. And a party, they have to build a party strong enough to win the elections, to have real chances to win. And to some extent, this urgency is making them put the ends before the means. And that's been very problematic. That's been really, really problematic. They have softened some of their proposals. They want to seem more pragmatic to win some electorate from the center. And that's an open discussion. I mean, this might be inevitable when it comes to institutional politics. I mean, you need to sound pragmatic and to win the center, and we all know that. But that is putting a lot of people away. I mean, the worst thing that can happen to Podemos is to be perceived as an ordinary party, as business as usual, and that's what's happening at the moment. they lost parts of this freshness and radicality, and that together with the extremely aggressive attacks from mainstream media and the establishment is putting them in a really hard situation at the moment. As for the other actors, you can see how the two main traditional parties are injured, but they're still alive. You know, I mean, they might not win absolute majorities again, but they're gonna keep a good share of power. And besides, and just in case, the establishment has created and promoted this kind of inside replacement. You know, is the party, you can see the fourth one, you can see a line up, straight, you know, that didn't exist before, and I mean, they were a regional party, they only existed in Catalonia, and you know, the establishment is giving them all the support to go all nationwide, and you know, we call them the good Podemos, you know, because you know, they're not radical. They talk about, okay, we have to change politics, but not so much. Obviously, they always wear with a suitcase, and you know, they are the good Podemos. Okay. And I mean, it's a kind of a pity, but they appeal to people, to many people who consider that there must be a change in Spanish politics, but who do not want any kind of radical experimentations. And well, and that's the situation at the moment, but the situation changed very quickly. It's changing constantly. Okay, this came out last week. I had a different image prepared, and the outcomes were different. And if I do this talk next month, it's going to be different again. And besides, and this is amazing. This is really unexpected. In 10 days, we have local elections. Okay, this is May 24th. And this is a less known process. There are people that outside Spain that have heard about Podemos, but I say nobody has heard about these local processes. The thing is that Podemos decided not to run for local elections because they hadn't the organizational strength to do it. And then people and organizations that had been really active during this whole cycle of protest and mobilization decided, as you mentioned before, to get their hands dirty and to create their own platforms and parties and run for the elections. I mean, these people, I mean, people who never ever voted, I mean, who don't, I mean, we don't want to have anything to do with institutional politics, and now they are running for the elections. And some of these platforms that are really close to the spirit of the squares are becoming really important. I mean, according to the last polls, to the same poll but for the local election last week, the platform in Madrid, in the capital city, that is called Madrid Now, could be the second most voted party. I mean, that's big news. And the platform in Barcelona, that is called Barcelona in Common, could be the first one. They could win the elections. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, the would-be mayor is a woman, Ada Colau, that she was one of the founders of the platform for people affected by mortgages. I mean, the anti-eviction movement we saw in the pictures before. I mean, can you imagine a city like Barcelona? I mean, Barcelona is a global city. It's the second most important city in Spain, run by grassroots activists. I mean, this was just unthinkable a few years ago. Actually, sometimes it's still hard to believe. And it opens up amazing opportunities for this redefinition of politics that is taking place since 2011. It would also pose huge challenges, obviously. But, I mean, these problems are marvelous problems to have. Alright, well, I'll finish just saying that what made these kind of things possible, I mean, the image that grassroots activists are going to run a city like Barcelona, hopefully they're going to run a city like Barcelona, was all these 15M movements. What happened in the squares was the events which transformed the relation between the possible and the possible in Spain. That's what all sudden, all unexpected. But for the last 4 years, we have been discussing how we want to live together, and that's a discussion we didn't have before, right? Politicians decided for us. So now we're having that discussion. We are discussing the need for collectively resignify democracy. We're discussing about the links and the frictions between grassroots and institutional politics. We are discussing the possibility or impossibility of taking power without being taken by power, or the importance of political experimentation and the construction, the knitting of these new solidarities. And these are the questions that I wanted to share with you today, and if you want, we can keep talking about this during the discussion time. Thank you for listening.
This paper draws on a large research study that I did with Carl and others in 8 communities that have experienced community protest in the last 5 to 6 years, from 2009 to 2014. In this paper, I argue that the failure of the state to transform the socio-economic order has resulted into people in poor communities feeling powerless, marginalized, and humanized. It emerged in the fieldwork that protests, as we all know, are often the last resort for many communities. And these protests often become violent when police arrive and start firing rubber bullets and tear gases at the protesters. The use of excessive force by the police are arguing this paper to say they further humanizes and degrades the protesters. It is at this point where I use my data with interviews which I conducted with young men who are often in the forefront of this community protest, to analyze how they imagine and reimagine new forms of masculinities in post-apartheid South Africa in the face of joblessness, powerlessness, and marginalization. On becoming violent, I draw on the work of James Holston's notion of insurgent citizenship, that the protests are a cry for the poor of the poorest to make claims about access to basic services. However, in this paper, I also analyze the darker side of the insurgent citizenship with specific focus on xenophobic attacks against foreign nationals during some of these community protests, the co-option of some of the protest leaders into the patronage networks, and exclusion and marginalization of other community members, especially female councillors